In today's show, Dan Devine of Yahoo Sports joins the program, and we talk the Trailblazers' outlook, the rebuild, cornerstones, best case scenarios, and what's next. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen. Coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen and tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, a very special one. Joined by friend of the program and returning guest, although it's been a little while, Dan Devine of Yahoo Sports, one of the true legends in the basketball blogosphere. Dan, how you doing?
Well, I mean, I'm a lot better now that I've heard all that. Thank you so much. It has been a while. But in that time, I've been doing nothing but mainlining Trailblazers basketball. So I've got a lot to talk about today.
Good. Well, all right, maybe not good, honestly, but I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. That's brave. And listen, Dan, you stuck around long enough to become a legend. Okay, you maybe didn't want it. Maybe you said I at the beginning of this experiment, I didn't want to be a legend, but when you've been doing it for 15 years at the level you've been doing it, you are merely legendary, my friend. We're here to talk about the Portland Trailblazers, who opened their season by getting absolutely walloped by the Golden State Warriors. Yesterday's show, I recapped all of that, so we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the Warriors game. If you want to relive that, there's like an episode waiting in your feed to like really experience what a 35-point season opening loss, the worst season opening loss in franchise history, what it all means. Yeah, you got to go back to 1971. They lost by 31 to the Sonics, and here we are in 2024, some 54 years later, and okay. In any case, Dan did the sort of heroic effort that people who write on the internet do, and he wrote team previews of every team in the league. Truly Herculean, maybe even beyond Herculean. Maybe Sisyphus is involved, but it's hard to say which Greek god it is or Greek figure it is. One of the challenges you mentioned is that the Blazers are in search of a cornerstone. Do they have that?
Well, first off, before we get even further, I have to give credit where it's due. Ben Rohrbach wrote half of them. I wrote 15 teams. He wrote 15 teams. So maybe it's less Sisyphean, or maybe there was two of us rolling the boulder up the hill. I don't know. We'll go with that.
Exactly. You both were on the same side of the boulder, just having it roll back over you each time. Exactly.
It's true. It does crush us, but we at least had, it's a little bit easier of a lift. I think the unsatisfying at the moment answer is TBD, right? I think you have kind of three candidates, or I guess maybe four now, where there's, is Anthony Simons capable of being a number one guy? Is Shaedon Sharpe able to take the leap into being that? Scoot Henderson, obviously the highest drafted player of the group, and then now Donovan Clingan as the new lottery pick, the new incoming sort of literal centerpiece in terms of what can you build the defense around him? Can you have him be a focal point offensively? And early returns, the returns heading out of last season, really uncertain in part because of all the injuries and inability to see consistently what all three of those guards together would look like, what the different two guard pairings might look like with significant growth. None of the statistical evidence or the eye test of watching those lineups together was particularly compelling. And now you see Shaedon Sharpe injured to start this season, so we're going to have to wait again to get some more information and some more data there. And I as you said, I don't want to go sort of chapter and verse over opening night, especially since that's ground you covered. I think the most notable and potentially concerning thing to me out of that opening night game was just Scoot Henderson. It feels like it's a distance between box score and watching, right?
Right.
You see like 22, 4, and 4 off the bench, and you're like, damn, that's a really productive game. And as I was watching it, I just kept thinking like, oh, they're picking on him relentlessly on defense. He's getting lost every time he's the low man, every time he's the weak side help defender. And maybe that scheme, in fairness to him, but he's like in the middle of the paint off a weak side shooter and sometimes even like one pass away, way off a weak side shooter. And the finishing, still not really there. The
He
jumpers,
missed two dunks on opening night. He missed two dunks.
Yeah, and so it's like if you are, as strong and athletic and like look the part all-star as he is, if you are a guard his size who cannot finish at like a John Morant, early Russell Westbrook level efficiency and explosiveness, where you're shooting 70% around the rim and getting there constantly, and the jumper is offline, it's just hard to know how that guy can be a fundamental or foundational cornerstone offensive player in the NBA in 2024, which is not to say obviously that he can't develop those things. But I think if you were starting opening night and saying, did you see enough growth in the areas you'd like to see growth for him? No, was my immediate first blush answer. And that, there will be runway for him. There will be opportunities, especially now that Shaedon Sharpe is off, on the sideline on the mend. But I think it's also notable that when it's like, well, how do we juggle the starting lineup? The answer was not Scoot Henderson. The answer was we're going to get, Toumani Camara in there. We're going to play bigger, and then we're going to let Scoot come off the bench in sort of a sixth man role, to which maybe he is better suited at this stage.
Yeah, I think he is in theory. Some people like to say, "Well, he play against backups." That's not really how benches work. Like he
came in all the time,
right? Like, and when he came in at halfway through the quarter. Steph was still on the court. He stayed through into the second quarter when the Warriors brought their guys back. So like, you can play against everybody. It's not like they could just. It's not like a hockey subs or whatever. You can just play against the second line. It would be nice. I think it'd be better against the second line. Although maybe like Pods and DeAnthony Melton specifically is not your ideal matchup for him. Bigger picture, can you rebuild without a cornerstone? Can you start the rebuild without a thing to build around?
I think you can, but you are trying to thread sort of like a vanishingly thin needle. Like there's just really not a ton of space, and you have to hit, like, if you don't hit the home run with one of those top of the draft picks or Kawhi or Giannis or somebody that is a middle of the first round pick that turns into that guy, or even like on a lower wattage, like Rudy Gobert being the 27th pick in the first round, but then developing into like, we can build everything around this guy. Obviously the highest end example of that is Jokic in the middle of the second round, but whatever. If you don't hit that home run, you got to like string together base hits constantly everywhere else. All of these other players have to show year over year growth, continual development. If for no other reason than you need those guys to be good enough to eventually trade for the guy. And the models there are like the early Houston Daryl Morey teams, where it's like enough of those, they're competitive and they're like all right, but then that turns into enough for Harden, or the mid-decade Pacers teams where it's like it's the 10th and the 12th and the whatever picks turn into stars or all-stars or good enough guys to where they can kind of churn the next thing. And then, Paul George turns into Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. And then those guys turn into, like, you have to keep kind of turning it over and over. And that's a hard way to live. It's rebuilding from the bottom to the middle. And then like getting from bad to decent is hard enough. Being able to then go from decent to really good and doing it without the benefit of being in LA or Miami or New York or having max space all the time is a really tricky dance. And it requires you to get almost every other move right. And I think there's a world in which there's enough growth and enough development. I think Joe Cronin on the sort of pregame interview before the season was like, success for us is taking steps. It's got to be everybody taking steps.
That's his big theme of the year. He said that a bunch, is taking steps.
And it's not it's not super satisfying.
Agreed.
But it is if enough of those guys take those steps, and it's like either one of two things happens. Either collectively you find a like 5-man harmonic convergence kind of cohesion that like greater than the sum of its parts sort of team that can be much better than the talent on hand would suggest, or enough of those guys become enticing enough on the deals they're on to be able to move them for more bites at the apple in the lottery to get that number one guy, or aggregate enough of them together to get that number one guy from a team that needs to get off of money. So it puts you in a really difficult position, or it puts you in a difficult position if not enough of those guys hit. And so that's where the Blazers are right now. To me, it seems like you need to see enough of these guys grow and develop and take those steps to be able to determine, A, is this someone that needs to be here forever? Or B, is this somebody that we can get another team excited about to be able to move off of them to sort of keep the roulette wheel spinning?
Yeah, I think the low data part is tough for them. It's just like they don't know enough, and that puts them in a weird spot. I want to talk about best case and worst case scenarios for this team, because I think weirdly their worst case scenario involves winning. Let's talk about that in the second segment. First, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is available pretty much wherever you are in over 30 states, including right here in Oregon. And like I said, it's the best place to get real money sports action. Prize Picks makes it easy to play. They just set these statistical projections and you pick more or less based on their projections. It's not you versus the field or versus the Sharks. It's just you versus the numbers. Plus, Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And Prize Picks puts members first, so you get your withdrawals quickly and safely and securely. And when your picks hit, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Plus, Prize Picks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts, like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value to your lineups. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, still chatting here with Dan Devine of Yahoo Sports. The Blazers, they started off on the wrong foot. They got smashed or whatever, but losing is kind of part of this. You want them to lose less bad. I think it would be. I look at like the Nets box score. I didn't watch the Nets game, but it's like, well, they only lost by 6 or whatever. That's what you're going for. You just want to lose. You want to lose 65 games. Yeah, you want to lose 65 games, but you want to lose all of them between 4 and 11 points. So you're like, so they're entertaining, right? But like you could still rack up those losses. But I think there is a world in which, well, I guess I'll pose it to you like this. What is the best case scenario for the 2024-2025 Portland Trailblazers? It's probably not the play-in, right?
Yeah, no, I think if you're not going to be competitive, if you don't have enough here to be competitive into the playoffs, then the best case scenario is keep getting, the bites at the apple, as we mentioned, the opportunities at the top of the draft, especially in draft classes where there might be several transformative caliber talents like the projections are for the 2025 draft class. But it's weird. It's interesting to me. Like, there is a world in which what you saw opening night, obviously the feeling of it is not ideal, but there's a world in which what happened is something closer to the best case scenario, in that, again, watching this, actually paying attention to it, they were like, there was a pretty close game for like 2.5 quarters. And you had there was like I think that starting lineup, the 5 that they've arrived at, makes sense to me and feels like a real NBA lineup where there's size and length and multiple guys who can make a play and multiple guys who can run a pick and roll and multiple guys who can score one-on-one. Like, there's a professional basketball team within this version of the Portland Trailblazers. And like Anthony Simons Anthony Simons had a 3 that could have cut it to 7, like midway through the third quarter. There was a team there, and then they completely let go of the rope and they got annihilated. But even that, again, that's kind of what you're looking for, right? Like, right. Show me professional basketball in a context in which we can better evaluate these young players. Is Anthony Simons able to be a primary ball handler? Is he best served moving off the ball, where you can have someone like Denny Avdia being more of the point forward and initiating, then side to side, second side attacking for Simons? Is that like his best role? Or can he be a 30% usage efficient scorer that you say, we can build around you as our 6'3" point guard if we fixed everything else everywhere else. Can Scoot Henderson, execute the assignment efficiently enough? Is he able, with a real screen and roll partner, is he able to get downhill into the paint consistently? Is he able to make the right reads off of it? Context, to me, is what this roster is like screaming out for. They were not able to provide that last year for a number of reasons, a lot of it due to injury and a lot of it due to just overall youth. This is still, if not the youngest team, one of the youngest teams in the NBA this season, but there are more sort of load-bearing walls to kind of hold everything up and allow you to get a better sense of what actually needs to get renovated. So I think there is a world, and maybe this is sort of glass half full optimism after a really brutal loss, but I think
we need optimism now. This is a great time for optimism.
Sure, and you know what? I can bring that to you today, where I think that there is a framework for more consistently legitimate competitive basketball, and then that can result in either A, wins, or B, a better environment in which to evaluate what you actually have. Because then when you come down to it, if you end up with 65 losses by, whatever, the final point differential is, you should, in theory, have a much better sense of who is worth keeping around, and also a high lottery pick. And like that, yeah, I think that is the best case scenario. And how you, but that said, it's easy to say that from the outside and from the 1 of 82 perspective of this. After 82 of them, the best case scenario might not feel all that great.
Yeah, I think that's the real challenge. It's the beauty of doing 250 episodes about the Portland Trailblazers all year long, is that it's like,
find the beauty in it. Yeah.
Yeah, you really got to chase it down. I do think the starting lineup sucked on night one. No doubt about it. Jeremy Grant was 6 of 18. That's like untenable for this group. Ant didn't shoot terribly, 5 of 12, but he started slower than that, and he didn't feel like he had a good game. I thought DeAndre Ayton had actually a really nice first shift. I thought his first quarter was oh, DeAndre Ayton's balling. And then I forgot that he was on the team for the remainder of the game. It's like, and then it was really quiet after that, and it happens. But I do think you're right. I do think the starting lineup makes sense, and you get a little bit of context. And they're always going to be light on shooting. Like, there's no magic to have this roster have better shooting. Like, you say like, oh, they chose to go bigger and have this team make sense with Toumani Camara. Usually that means you sacrifice some shooting and maybe some ball handling. It's not like they did sacrifice maybe some ball handling, but it's not like they have someone on the bench who's like, well, if you sub him in, magically they will be a good shooting team. They just don't have it.
I mean, the guy is, unfortunately, it's the guy who just is injured and is going to be out for a couple of weeks. And the hope is that Shaedon Sharpe, as a sort of an electric offensive player, is able to bridge that gap. But even within that, that lineup played almost half the game and was outscored by 5 points. And that's the 3-point shooting variant is not a particularly revolutionary thing to say, well, the Warriors went 8 for 19 from 3 during those shifts, and that lineup went 5 for 6 or 3 for 16 or something. And so then there's the game. But that's what it is. And some nights, Jeremy Grant might hit 4 of 6 of the, you might get a hot Ant game. The shooting variance lines up a little bit better. To me, it's the process stuff. And so that's where I look at Simons, especially, and him as just the foundational piece here, or the potential foundational piece. I thought it was interesting, and I think it's interesting to see, how does Chauncey Billups want to utilize him? How does the addition of Deni Avdija impact that? Is there a little more let's get you off the ball, let's have you, we're going to run pick and roll on one side with you spotted up over here, as opposed to saying you lead the way in touches, you create everything. Because that, to me, is where the thing that Anthony Simons is best at is, I think he's a world-class elite shooter, and I'd rather have him doing it off the catch than off the pull if I can help it, and at least right now. And so I think there's some structure there, and there seemed to be an intentionality about, we want side-to-side movement, we want pace, we want the idea of not getting into the last 4 or 5 seconds of the shot clock. We want to attack early, and because part of that is, we don't think we have an elite talent to create in those situations necessarily. If our possession bogs down into Jeremy Grant isoing on Draymond Green, it's probably not going to go well. So in the absence of that, Steph, SGA, Luka, run down the list of those sorts of guys, we need to do it differently. And I think the goal eventually is we got to get one of those guys. And in the interim, it's can we find out if any of our guys are close enough to that? And I think that's going to be the ongoing learning curve this year, and how Billups tries to arrive at that conclusion, how the lineups are sort of structured and the rotation is managed to try to figure out the answer to that question is probably the biggest thing hanging over this Blazers season.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the how the utilization of Ant. Part of what we saw in game one was when Scoot was on the court, Simons basically never initiated. He was always off the ball, and so that's step one. But what as you mentioned, like what do they do with Denny? Like what is Denny? Does Denny mostly play on the ball? Yeah. I thought Denny had a nice first 5 minutes, and then I think you saw the sort of some of his challenges in the half court. Like he's just a little bit deliberate. He can get a little bit too downhill and get caught in the mud, and then it's like he doesn't have the creativity or maybe the touch to get out of sticky situations. And the Blazers offense is a little sticky. It's a little sticky. So I think there's 81 more of these things, and they have the freedom to experiment. And I think that's the perspective to keep, is that freedom to experiment. You don't want the 35-point loss is a 35-point loss, though.
Sure. I think though there's like a yin and yang or flip sides of the same coin question. When you noted, like from the perspective of when Scoot's on the floor, Simons is off the ball. That to me is as much a Scoot matter as a Simons one, because if Scoot is off the ball, what value is he providing to you in the offense at this stage?
Where do you put him? Like where does he stand? If he stands in the strong side corner, do they just still ignore him? If he's on the weak side corner, they're obviously going to ignore him. If he's up high, again, I think they ignore him. It's like, where does he even stand off the ball?
Yeah, until or unless he can prove his shot is workable enough that you got to honor him out there, then moving him off the ball it further gunks up what you already identified as a pretty sticky half-court offense. And so there are these individual developmental check marks for everybody, or these checkpoints that you've got to get past, that then also coalesce into how we identify or evaluate the overall health of our offense or our system, what we're trying to do. And so that's going to be the push and pull. Like all these guys have to get better in their individual discrete skills. That also allows you to then figure out, sort of where we are as a team. I think the general consensus, and, maybe I would be interested to see if I wind up being proven wrong here. I think the general consensus is Portland is far away from having like consistently positive answers to most of those questions and to legitimate competition. Those things get a lot, the runway can get shorter if all of a sudden, as the season goes on, Scoot's jumper comes online in a major way and is able to, then you're able to be more sort of not your turn, my turn, but we overlap in ways that can augment one another in terms of you got two guys that you got to worry about off the ball. You got two guys that you got to worry about off the bounce. Now there's more space. There's more driving lane, all that kind of stuff. The virtuous kind of cycles of that develop, and they you can compound the interest. But for now, it does feel a little bit like, given the shortcomings each individual guy has on the offensive end, to say nothing of the defensive end, where there's pretty big problems that start with like, whoever is furthest back needs to stop the ball in transition, and somebody needs to make sure they are paying attention to where the hit-ahead pass is going. And do not dramatically overhelp off the strong side corner one pass away. Like the basic stuff, there's a lot to get ironed out there as well. But like that's the shortest path to relevance, is like be decent on defense and start getting some answers on offense. Easier said than done.
Yeah, I thought they were going to be more competitive on offense. The transition defense was bad in preseason, and then night one, it was horrendous. Yay! Okay, I want to talk about trading vets, because I think part of the path here is that this roster is not even close to finished, and you got to sell off some of the stuff. Let's talk about that to close the show. Join us in the third segment. First, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and they're making it more fun for you to be a sports fan, particularly an NFL fan. It might be a little too late for Thursday Night Football as you're listening to Friday's episode, but if you're watching football this weekend, plop down on the couch on Sunday and you got a hunch middle of the game and you want to place a live wager, well, FanDuel makes it easy for you to be an informed bettor right up to the second. On the same page where you place your bets, you're going to see live play-by-play. You're going to see up to the second stats. So you can get all of the information you could possibly need to make your live bets right there while you're watching the game. Plus, if you're a first-time user, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. It's America's #1 sports book, and that's FanDuel.com. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You're still listening to Locked On Blazers. Still chatting with Dan Devine of Yahoo Sports. Part of the quest for the Trailblazers is probably to end up with a different group at the end of the year, one way or another.
Right.
The obvious trade candidates are the gentlemen who have had their 25th birthday. those guys are old on the team. Unfortunately, that I don't know what that makes us, Dan, ancients, but it's when I started doing this 11 years ago, I was kind of the same age as NBA guys. It's not true anymore.
You know what, Mike? What it makes you is what we established at the beginning of the show. It's a legend.
It's truly in the Blazers locker room, legendary. But this guy talked to Earl Watson. This guy knows. This guy knows J.J. Hickson. I don't know him very well, but yeah, I knew him at one time. In any case, the obvious candidates to be traded are Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton, Rob Williams to some extent. I guess you could throw Matisse Thybulle in that boat, but like it's not the same. He's in a different boat. He's in the sidecar of the motorcycle. How, in your view, how necessary is it that they trade one, several, all of those gentlemen before they get by the time they get to the trade deadline or the day after, whatever it looks like?
To me, the biggest ones are it's got to be either Ayton or Robert Williams, if only because you want to give as many opportunities as possible to Donovan Clingan, right? And it's not, and there's the general wisdom of like, you want the young guys to earn their minutes, not just to be gifted them. But if you've got three, legitimate rotation caliber centers, you do want to clear out the pathway for the youngest one, the one that you have the most invested in, to get the developmental opportunities. And especially if the idea is he's going to be the pathway to our defense getting eventually good, you got to learn the dark arts of NBA big man stuff early. You got to figure out how to play two. You got to figure out how to, be able to get up on the pick and roll and then get back, the yo-yo, all that kind of stuff. And the only way you do that is by doing it and getting out there. And that affords you the opportunity. So obviously there are challenges to moving either Ayton or Robert Williams for different reasons. Ayton contractually and Time Lord, just, health and a team maybe not wanting to part with any significant asset given the uncertainty surrounding how frequently he'll be on the court. But I think to me, that's the one. Everything else, like Jeremy Grant, I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of we want to get as many number one option reps as possible for the aforementioned Simons, Sharp, Scoot group, that's fine. But like Jeremy Grant doesn't necessarily totally block those guys from doing that.
Agreed.
And is also probably, again, the trickiest to move contractually, just given the size of what's remaining on that deal. Although 3 years left on it is a lot different than 5 years left on it. It's, stuff like that. So to me, I guess you could argue that Grant and Denny Avdia would wind up like somewhat duplicative in terms of the role they can occupy as combo forwards who are probably best with the ball in their hands. But I don't know that I don't personally feel like this is my personal feeling. If the idea, if the sort of choice that I'm faced with is trade all of them and then throw all of the young guys out there and say like, all right, go for it, or at least have enough of them left over to have that developmental context we were talking about earlier, I would go with that 10 times out of 10. I think if you just give the young guys minutes sounds good in theory. And then when like nobody can make the entry pass, nobody can make the reads in the screen and roll, nobody can make the catch and shoot three off of that, nobody can do the hard dive to the rim or be the communicator on the back line or whatever. That's the stuff that can make like a down season into an absolute disaster where you don't actually get a whole lot of the benefit of those minutes and those reps because they're not even good reps. So I think to me, it's not, we got to get rid, sort of burn down the forest to save it. It's like, you want to be, like more of a controlled burn, I suppose. Like figure out which parts really need to sort of go away to keep the ecosystem as healthy as possible. I think that to me is where I would be looking if I was Joe Cronin.
I would agree with the sort of maintaining some sort of semblance of an NBA team when you're making these trades, because you see Scoot already struggling on this team in the half court with what they currently have. If you were to strip down the only dude on the, one of the two dudes, or maybe both of them, and Anfernee Simons and Jeremy Grant, who can shoot above average from three, it's like, what value are we offering the young parts? Like what context are we growing this in? So I think they're cognizant of that. I think they are. They've been a little slow playing this, so I wouldn't be surprised if they continue. What they like to say is patience, and I say what I call dragging this shit out. But it's in the eye of the beholder. Like I think there is some value in patience if you say, what is our rush? What is our rush? Like what do you need? Content for the podcast, Mike? Like, come on, just like they have the sort of value of it. I think there is some part of the decision making where you have to decide whether Anfernee Simons is part of the long-term plan or in quote unquote in the way, or the third option, which I personally think is most likely, just not good enough to be part of what's next. And so trading him actually has more value. But I don't think they need to make that decision in October. I know they don't. They certainly don't need, and they can play 45 games before of figuring it out before they, this is year 7. They have a lot of data on him, but like 45 games of this version of it to see what it looks like and to make some decisions. And I don't think it is necessarily dependent on Scoot being good. I think Scoot can suck and they still need to trade Anfernee Simons. I think, but I am but one man. I don't know if that is what's widely shared across the league.
I mean, it's tricky though. If you are a front office that is invested in this player who you have sort of shepherded his growth the entirety of his career, and being able to look at it and say, it's just not going to get to that level. Like you can do the stuff like I did in the preview where I'm like, if you kind of squint and look at the age of, like by age, his production is kind of similar to Dame's. It's like, yeah, but also there are also the things where like, when you see it and you maybe haven't seen it. And if you haven't seen it yet, maybe you're not gonna. And that's that. But these are business decisions. These are calculated financial decisions. Sometimes it is also gut stuff and emotional stuff too. And I wouldn't be surprised if that front office maybe is having, like, especially looking at it and saying, this is the closest thing we have to like a real NBA perimeter player right now.
Right.
But maybe, if there is a chilly market for Jeremy Grant because of the contract, if you now the presence of Deni Avdija as a ball handler, maybe that makes it a little bit easier to say, all right, we can still have something resembling function even if he is no longer on the table. And then also Shaedon Sharpe now healthy, he goes into that, and you can let him get up as many shots or as many touches as you can, crank up his usage and see from there. So there's still sort of experiments to explore, but you're right. I think the other thing, and this is like a grim truth of NBA life, is deciding today that you want to do that. Who knows who gets hurt? And then in the space of the next 3 months, a team that had maybe thought it had an answer at the point guard or at the combo guard spot or off the bench or whatever is looking at it and saying, we actually really need an infusion of juice right now. And our season matters today for this particular reason. All right, maybe we talk to Portland and see where they're at. I was one of many, that's not a super wise thing, but like I was one of many people that was like, doesn't he make a ton of sense with the Magic? But then the Magic have sort of, adjusted around what they want. But
they don't want offense.
They want big guys with long arms who can't shoot, and then everything else will be everything else. But who knows who Team X might be that finds itself put to that decision, and then you maybe are able to operate from a position of strength as opposed to one of weakness. If I'm Joe Cronin, I can imagine having that line of thought.
See, that's the patience. My complaint, and then Dan's logic on how the patience works, is that you literally just have to see if the market plays out, because if it's bad now, what's the worst it's going to be? Bad later? But it might end up being a lot better. Dan, you're the best. I always appreciate the time. If folks are looking for more of their work, where should they look? Where should they put those eyeballs?
All right. Well, you can find me at Yahoo Sports. Everything that I write about the NBA is going to be there. On social media at Your Man Devine across platforms. The new thing I'm doing this year is I have been Tom Haberstroh, Blazers analytics insider, was kind enough to let me be kind of the Andy Richter on his new podcast, the Big Number podcast. We just launched today, Thursday the 24th at Yahoo Sports. We're talking about stretch fives, a little bit of DeAndre Ayton and Donovan Clingan talk there about how real stretch fives are. Especially preseason jumps in three-point shooting rate. So it's going to be Tom is the smart one, and I get to be the one who like asks him dumb questions and tries to make jokes. It's perfect for me. I love this role. So I'm going to try to enjoy that. But yeah, I'm going to be writing a bunch of Yahoo Sports and tweeting a bunch of dumb jokes and links to songs I like. So you can always find me there.
Dan's really the best. If you're not familiar with Dan's work, Dan has been writing thoughtfully about the NBA for long enough to send his career to middle school, and it's
it's getting bullied there though, and I don't know what to do about it.
It is. It made JV, and it is getting just beat up. But
yeah, can't crack varsity. That's Dan Devine's career. Can't crack varsity. Beautiful. Mwah, I'm glad I did this today.
Seriously, I will say though, in the internet world where increasingly there is less thought and care put into writing about the NBA, the thing that Dan does about as well as anyone you're going to read anywhere on the whole dang planet is put thought and care into his work. It is always thoughtful. It is always considered, and I love reading it, and I've loved reading it for a long time. Dan, thank you so much.
Oh, dude, Mike, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, anytime. At this time, I won't wait 2.5 seasons to invite you back. Dear listeners, you know what we do. We do it 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. That means next week, you're listening to Friday, October 25th show. That means next week, we'll do 5 more of these. By the next time you hear my voice, the Blazers will have played the Pelicans twice. The Pelicans sans DeJounte Murray. So I guess a lot of old friends, CJ McCollum, back in the building. So, come back Monday show. We'll talk about the 2 Pelicans games. We'll do 5 more of these. It's available wherever you get podcasts. If you're into it, tell a friend, leave a nice review, do your thing. 5 stars. I don't know how the algorithm works, but I know that 5 stars is what you need to do. I know that if you're a 5-star person, if you're a person who reviews things, go ahead and drop 5 stars on it. Tell your friends about the program. Come back and listen to it. I appreciate you listening. I will talk to you soon.